Good afternoon, everyone. I first want to acknowledge the immense grief we're holding individually and collectively in response to the violence, trauma, and despair engulfing the people of Israel and Palestine. The targeted attacks on civilians in Israel by Hamas nearly 2 weeks ago inflicted violence on thousands in a devastating and horrific way. We urge and pray for the safe return of kidnapped civilians back to their loved ones. As violence has now consumed the region, Israel's airstrikes on Gaza have devastated neighborhoods and killed and injured thousands of civilians. Palestinian families have been separated and killed. We know this from our own experience with emergency evacuations. In times of crisis, those left behind are people with the least means to evacuate: older adults, sick people, poor people, and disabled children and adults. Let's be clear. The horrors of violence and war exact a tragic toll on human life. Civilians, women, children, and elders, Palestinian, Israeli, and those of other nationalities have lost their lives, tearing apart families. It is horrific. We unequivocally condemn and mourn the killing of all civilians, and we call for peace. This is not about blame. It's about our humanity and the right for all people to access safety. We must acknowledge the real fear and pain that many New Yorkers, including our own members right here and our own staff, are feeling, especially those with family and loved ones in the region, as they watch these traumatic events unfold from afar. Escalating violence threatens to bring even more death and destruction upon civilians, and in this moment, it is critical that we recognize our shared humanity and collective desire for peace. We must insist that peace is possible and remain committed to working together towards solutions that ensure the safety of all people. Everyone deserves to live safely with dignity and security. In a city as diverse as New York City, there will always be wide-ranging and differing opinions. As elected officials who represent New Yorkers from all walks of life, it is incumbent upon us to restrain from rhetoric that can lead to any New Yorker becoming or feeling less safe. We've seen how rhetoric can lead directly to fear and violence. With lives at stake and emotions at an all-time high, we must weigh our words carefully, especially as elected leaders. Hate crimes, which had already risen across the nation, have been magnified in our city and other parts of the country over the past few days. This leaves all of us less safe. Our role as local elected officials is to combat these issues that impact the safety of our constituents. Especially in times of crisis, our shared humanity must be our lighthouse. As we navigate grief and trauma, we must allow our shared desire for safety and preservation of life to guide our way forward. Now let's move on to our stated agenda. First, we'll vote on the following finance items. Resolution 807, sponsored by Councilmember Justin Brannan, sets the date, time, and place for a public hearing authorizing changes to the assessment method for the Westchester Square Business Improvement District. Resolution 808, also sponsored by Councilmember Justin Brannan, sets the date, time, and place for a public hearing authorizing increases in the annual expenditure for 4 business improvement districts. Next, we'll vote on the following land use items. Livonia 4, technical correction to amend Council Resolution 433 from last year related to the Urban Development Action Area and Project. The amendment will clarify the 17 lots subject to the UDAA and UDAP approvals, disposition of the city-owned property approval, and 1 additional lot in Councilmember Barron's district. 6 landmark designations that celebrate the rich cultural history of our city. The Bronx Opera House was built as a theater and restaurant around 1913 and served as an entertainment center for more than 6 decades, featuring Broadway acts and many other performances in Deputy Speaker Ayala's district. In the 1950s, the Bronx Opera House became the home to a series of nightclubs and was an important place of social gathering and expression of Latin culture. 935 St. Nicholas Avenue building, a neo-Gothic revival-style brick, limestone, and terracotta apartment building built in 1915 in Councilmember Abreu's district. The apartment building was home to Edward Kennedy Duke Ellington and Noble Lee Sissel, 2 pioneers of jazz who were among the most prolific composers and musicians in American history. Hotel Cecil in Minton's Playhouse building, an example of the Renaissance revival style built in late 1895 in Councilmember Richardson Jordan's district. It operated as a residential hotel and was eventually listed in consecutive editions of the Negro Motorist Green Book, a popular guide that identified businesses that were friendly to black travelers from 1941 to 1961. This Harlem nightclub is recognized in many jazz histories as the birthplace or cradle of bebop in the 1940s. John Burke's Dizzy Gillespie residence, a 3-family building in the colonial revival style with simple facades of patterned red brick, cast stone keystones, and cartouches in Councilmember Moya's district. Dizzy and his wife Lorraine owned the building until the mid-1980s. Fire Alarm Telegraph Bureau, Bronx Central Office, is one of 4 dedicated borough offices constructed in the early 20th century after the FDNY decentralized its fire alarm telegraph operations in Councilmember Felice's district. And Firehouse Engine Company 88, Ladder Company 38, also in Councilmember Felice's district, is unique among firehouses for its prairie-style influence and has served the Bronx for 115 years, including through the pandemic of arson that overtook portions of the Bronx in the 1960s and 70s and has played an important role in protecting the neighborhood. Today, we will also vote on the following resolutions. Resolution 581, sponsored by Councilmember Eric Dinowitz, calls upon the city to recognize November as Veteran Appreciation Month in New York City. Resolution 422, sponsored by Councilmember Vicky Palladino, calls upon the New York City Department of Education to expand career-connected learning programs and opportunities at all public high schools. Resolution 68, sponsored by Councilmember Ari Kagan, calls upon the New York State Legislature and United States Department of Housing and Urban Development to increase accountability by auditing the responsiveness of NYCHA managers to tenants. Resolution 459A, sponsored by Councilmember Amanda Farias, calls on the New York State Legislature to pass and the governor to sign legislation prohibiting municipalities from requiring employers to use the Federal Economic Verification System, or E-Verify, to check prospective employees' work authorization status. It also prohibits employers from checking the employment authorization status of existing employees or applicants who have not been offered employment. We'll also vote on the following pieces of legislation. Introduction 102A, sponsored by Councilmember Justin Brannan, would require the Department of Environmental Protection to publish the location of every green roof in the city on the Green Infrastructure Program map or another map on the department's website using the best information available. The map would include certain information about each green roof, including the type of building, the area of the roof, and the area covered by the green roof system, the capacity of the green roof to absorb water, and the function or functions of the green roof. Councilmember Brannan could not join us today, but I thank him for his work on this legislation. Introduction 1084A, sponsored by Councilmember Mercedes Narcisse, would require the Department of Health and Mental Hygiene to include in its training on trauma-informed care the appropriate information on refugee, asylee, asylum seeker, and migrant experiences. The bill requires DOHMH to determine who of those serving refugees, asylees, asylum seekers, and migrants should be offered the training and to offer it to them. I invite Councilmember Narcisse to the podium to discuss her legislation.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Councilwoman Mercedes Narcisse and a nurse. Healthcare has always been at the forefront of my priorities. Today, I am proud to stand before you as the sponsor of Intro 1084A, a bill that holds the promise of creating a more compassionate and empathetic New York City for those who have sought refuge and asylum within our borders. In healthcare, we understand the profound impact of trauma on an individual's physical and mental well-being. We know that healing goes beyond just addressing physical wounds. It also required understanding the emotional scars that trauma can leave behind. And it's not just a matter of providing care. It is about providing the right kind of care, care that recognizes that unique needs and of those who have faced adversity and hardship. Intro 1084A is our response to this pressing need. It calls for the development of training on trauma-informed care for those serving refugees, asylum seekers, and migrants in our great city. This training is not just about compliance. It's about equipping our service providers with the knowledge and tools they need to offer compassionate, understanding, and effective care to those who need it the most. By recognizing the sign of trauma exposure, understanding the behaviors associated with trauma, and embracing trauma-informed principles, we are taking a significant step forward in our mission to provide healthcare that truly heals. It's about acknowledging that the people we serve are not just patients or clients. They are individuals with unique experiences and stories that deserve our respect, support, and care. Keep in mind, those individuals travel from far. They came a long way. They encountered several adversities, like we said. When I'm talking about those individuals we're talking about that come to our borders, those are folks seeking a better life. Those are the women, the stories that I have been hearing. It's sad, very sad. At its core, this bill is about humanity. It's about ensuring that we do everything in our power to create a safer, more compassionate, and more inclusive New York City for all. Regardless of one's stance on immigration, policy, and the migrant issue, I hope we can all agree on the importance of addressing the basic healthcare needs of those who have experienced trauma and adversity. I want to express my deepest gratitude to all the folks that have worked on this bill very hard, including my colleagues, healthcare professionals, and community organizations. And most importantly, I want to say thank you to my speaker that have been awesome on putting bills that make sense for New York City and to actually make New York City a place where we can live, work, and enjoy, like I always said. I urge my fellow council members to all consider the profound impact that Intro 1084 can have on our city. Let's stand together and make a resounding statement that New York City, we prioritize well-being of every individual, regardless of their past experiences or the borders they cross. We are here together. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Councilmember Narcisse. Introduction 790B, sponsored by Councilmember Gail Brewer, would amend Local Law 35 of 2014 to add documentation and verifications to the list of acceptable documents for proof of identity needed to apply for an IDNYC card. Applicants for IDNYC would be able to provide certain documents issued by federal immigration authorities, electronic verification through the Department of Correction, and a released offender identification card issued by the New York State Department of Corrections and Community Supervision. This bill would also amend the list of documents documents accepted for proof of residency to include written verification from emergency housing deemed appropriate by the agency. This is intended to enshrine the agency's acceptance of residency documents received from the HERC and Respite Center providers that can be verified. I now invite Councilmember Brewer to discuss her important legislation.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you, Chair Sandra Ong. Thank you very much. 790B, as you heard, would expand the list of acceptable documents to obtain an ID NYC card. I hope everybody has their card. I have mine. Good. The City Council created this in 2014, a different administration, different council, to give every New York City resident the opportunity to obtain legitimate government-issued photo ID. Good idea. The 2014 law specified the types of documents an applicant can use to demonstrate proof of identity and proof of residency at that time. And at that time, the law states that the administrating agency, Human Resources Administration, may, quote, accept, quote, any other documentation that the agency deems acceptable, unquote. But this is the problem. The decision to deem a document acceptable falls on individual HRA employees who work really hard and are understaffed, and they're supposed to process this application. And I've heard from workers at the HERCs and at the shelters where migrants are sheltered that it's luck of the draw. Sometimes documents issued by federal immigration authorities are accepted as proof of identity, and other times they are not. And sometimes letters from HERCs are accepted as proof of residency, but not always. And guess what? Now when you're being told you gotta move in 30 days, you gotta move in 60 days, and then you go to lawyers and they say, oh, sorry, I can't accept because you're not at a location. All of these play into the need to get this ID as soon as possible, so at least you have something. This would expand the acceptable documents, Intro 790B, to have more, at least 3 forms from the U.S. Department of Homeland Security, some of which show up at the border. Verification through the Department of Correction, City Correction, so that incarcerated individual lookup systems, those verifications would be acceptable. A, quote, released offender ID card issued by the New York State Department of Corrections, that would be applicable. And then the one that's most important and sometimes harder to get, written verification from emergency housing that receives city funding. And we'll have a longer discussion about that in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Councilmember Brewer. Introduction 1026A, sponsored by Councilmember Sandra Ung, would require the mayor to appoint an agency or office to prepare a report on potential locations for the construction of a bus transit center in Flushing, Queens, to enable passengers to get on or off buses without impeding the surrounding streets or sidewalks. The report would also estimate projected costs associated with the construction of such a bus transit center, as well as expected benefits to the local area. The administering agency would be required to submit the report to the mayor and the council and post it on its website. I now invite Councilmember Ung up to the podium to give remarks on her important legislation.
Today, I'm proud to announce a legislation that will address a pressing need in the Flushing community. Flushing is not just a bustling transit hub for Northeast Queens residents. It is the busiest bus-to-transfer location in the mass transit system and a crucial connecting point for our city. But the current situation of the buses parking on the street presents several challenges, including congestion and potential public safety hazards for pedestrians and other drivers. The need for a bus transit center in Flushing has been well documented since it was first proposed in the 1960s. My legislation creates a task force to determine potential sites for a bus transit center, as well as estimate costs for land acquisition and construction. We'll set in motion the process to finally make this proposal a reality. By establishing this task force, we are committing to providing public transportation infrastructure that our constituents deserve. The benefits of this project are numerous. In addition to alleviating congestion on Flushing's busy streets, a bus transit center will provide designated and secure place for riders to enter and exit buses and protect them from the weather. Also offers a comfortable space for hardworking bus drivers to take well-deserved breaks during their shifts. And have discussions with Amalgamated Transit Union, which represents our bus drivers, and they have also identified the need for this type of facility in Flushing. This endeavor is more about convenience. It's about safety, efficiency, and a better quality of life for our residents. Building a bus center in Flushing will still require a lot of work and support from all levels of government, but this task force will provide us information and data we need to begin to meet the challenges ahead. I want to thank Transportation Chair Brooks Bowers and Speaker Adams for their leadership for bringing this piece of legislation before the entire City Council vote. And thank you for my council members in advance for their support.
Thank you, Councilmember Ong. Introduction 712A, sponsored by Councilmember Eric Botcher, would require the Department of Transportation to report on motor vehicles with license plates that are unreadable by red light cameras or school speed cameras. The report would include information on the days and times of day when the license plates could not be read, the community districts where they could not be read, and the reason the license plate could not be read. Councilmember Botcher may come up to the podium and discuss his legislation. Could not be better.
Thank you so much, Speaker Adams. Hi, everyone. Getting 24/7 speed cameras and cameras that detect unreadable license plates was a big win. Unfortunately, we still don't have a clear picture of the extent of how many people are driving cars with unreadable license plates. We've all seen it. License plates with these films on them where you can't read the number. Printed out license plates with just bogus numbers on them. We got them folded up. And then we've got cars with no license plates at all, and they're driving around New York City. They're putting the public in danger, and they're thwarting the law. Previously, journalists and advocates have had to foil the city to get access to the data. How many people are getting captured by speed cameras and red light cameras, but we can't read their license plates. The legislation that the City Council is passing today will require the Department of Transportation to quarterly post the data on its website, how many people are engaging in this practice and how many people are thwarting these cameras. That will allow us to get a fuller picture of the extent of the problem. It'll allow us to track our progress in addressing this issue, and it'll add transparency to a big issue that's affecting many, many New Yorkers. I really want to thank all my colleagues, the chair of the Transportation Committee, of Selvena Brooks Powers. I want to thank Speaker Adams and all the advocates who are pushing to get a handle on this growing problem in New York City. No driver should be able to drive in a car that doesn't have a visible license plate. It's common sense. Time for us to get serious about addressing this issue. Thanks so much.
Very nice. Thank you. Thank you, Councilmember Botcher, with the impeccable timing. That was really something. Introduction 1119A, sponsored by Majority Whip Selvena Brooks Powers, would require the Department of Health and Mental Hygiene to report annually on drowning deaths that occur in the city. The report would include the location and facility type at which the drowning death occurred, the manner in which the drowning death occurred, and information about the deceased, including their age group, gender identity, race, and ethnicity, whether they had a physical, medical, mental, or psychological impairment, and whether alcohol, drugs, or prescription medication was a contributing factor. Introduction 1164A, also sponsored by Majority Whip Selvena Brooks Powers, would require the Department of Transportation to promote equity in infrastructure investment as part of its master plan and include an investment roadmap. DOT would report for each neighborhood the level of investment in safety-enhancing street infrastructure and other types of street infrastructure made in the past 15 years, the incidence rate of collisions that result in significant injuries, the demographics of the neighborhood, whether the neighborhood is considered underserved, and if the neighborhood has received low investment but is not considered underserved, the factors that DOT considered in reaching that conclusion. I invite Majority Whip Brooks Powers to the podium to discuss both of her important bills.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I am proud to sponsor two bills up for a vote today that will advance equity citywide in our city's waters and on its streets. First is Introduction 1119, which seeks to address a public health issue affecting every community in the city, drownings. Drowning is the #1 killer of young children nationwide, and data from the CDC shows that children of color are especially vulnerable to drowning. This legislation will require DOH-MH to report annually and publicly on drownings in the city. The report will include the location of each drowning, the demographics of the victim, and additional information about the circumstances of the incident. This specific reporting will empower policymakers and advocates to develop more effective programs and policies to address drownings. I am grateful for the efforts of bill drafter Jesse Fung and Health Committee staff, including Sarah Zucker, for her work on this bill. I note, too, that this legislation is a part of our efforts to improve water safety and take a more equitable approach to aquatics in New York City. New Yorkers of color were excluded from many public pools in the 20th century, and the specter of this segregation lingers still. 1 out of 3 black students can't swim, while 1 out of 10 white students cannot. 18 council districts still lack the Department of Parks and Recreation pools, mostly in communities of color. Second is the introduction of 1164, which will create an investment roadmap within the city's streets plan law to help ensure DOT is making equitable infrastructure investments throughout the city. So many communities, out-of-borough communities, low-income communities, communities of color, have not received their fair share of the city street and infrastructure investments. It is crucial that the city regularly takes stock of this legacy and work to address it. This legislation will require DOT to identify underserved neighborhoods with a need for additional infrastructure and to set out a future investment and set out the future investments in these neighborhoods necessary to ensure they are no longer underserved. I am grateful to the committee staff for their work on this, including Mark Chen for his efforts to draft and finalize this legislation. I also thank my colleagues for their partnership, and of course, Speaker Adrienne Adams for her leadership on these important issues. This council will continue to work to ensure every New Yorker is empowered to swim safely in the city's waters and to make more equitable, life-saving investments in our street safety infrastructure. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Majority Whip. That concludes our stated agenda.
The IDNYC bill, is that, I guess first of all, is the mayor's office supportive of that, the idea, and then that this, it sounded like it had been an issue, that it was left in the draw, some people were applying and not getting it.
Yeah, I mean, we heard a lot from the individuals who are helping people fill out the documents, that it was luck of the draw, particularly on the residency issue, but also on some of the documents that had come from the federal government at the border.
Do you not know about the mayor's office?
I don't know, haven't heard that it's a negative, and I know that the people who are doing the work would appreciate having more opportunity to give people the opportunity to get the card.
Steve, you announced the second Litman Commission today. It was reported in the New York Times that that's coming. I wonder if you can talk about why is that necessary right now, and do you think that a federal receivership is an appropriate step at Rikers right now?
Thank you for the question. Well, we all know that Rikers is undermining public safety in our city, and those who work and are detained there are not safe at all. It was very important for us to reappoint the Litman Commission to get the plan to close Rikers back on track. We have, as a city, we have to be able to solve difficult challenges in the best interest of New Yorkers, and this is one of major importance for all New Yorkers. As far as the second part of your question, and it all still is very, very central to the fact that we are very intent on meeting the law to close Rikers in 2020. Bless you. And we've got 4 years until we close that date. We have our work cut out for us, but we have to get back on track to close.
No comment one way or the other on receivership?
Well, as far as receivership is concerned, you know, we're focused right now on our plan to close. Whether receivership happens or doesn't happen, you know, we're in the wings watching the whole process of how that works out. But our mission right now is to get this commission up and running. Thank you.
So when do you expect the Standards and Ethics Committee to meet regarding Councilman Burnikoff? And your statement mentioned recusals, like plural. So do you think that Yeager should be recused as chair? And then, you know, personally, what kind of punishment, if any, do you think Councilmember Burnikoff should face with the gun?
Thanks for the question, Jeff. Yep, we've referred the matter to the Standards and Ethics Committee, and there is a criminal legal process that the council won't interfere with. So that precedes anything that the council will do at this point. We don't want to undermine that process, so it's unlikely that anything can occur with the council process until the next step, and that is the criminal proceeding. As far as the recusals are concerned, you know, we're going to have to take a look at that when we get to that bridge in order to cross it. But first, we are taking a look at the criminal process and see how that progresses before we take any further steps.
Did you have any personal thoughts on whether, you know, punishment, or do you leave it up to the courts?
We are waiting to see how this progresses and processes through the court system. Due process. Ethan?
So, Speaker, you know, earlier in the week, and I believe the Deputy Speaker put out a statement on this, but the, you know, mayor moved forward with a 60-day rule for families. I just wanted to get your reaction to that, and then also, you know, they released this plan to have a semi-congregate setting for families at Floyd Bennett Field once it actually gets up and running.
Yeah.
Also wanted your reaction to that.
Yeah, thanks for the question, Ethan. You know, the policy really is concerning and puzzling, as it goes against the administration's previous insistence on ensuring the safety of families with children. Instead, it now has the potential to exacerbate street homelessness, destabilize the lives of children and families, and place children in unsafe situations, which is something that, of course, we don't want to see. So I'm concerned about the impact on children and families, and we do have a hearing on Monday where we will question the administration thoroughly on the entire issue. I continue to wish, though, that there would be more collaboration by the administration to address its challenges and in rolling out these new policies so that we can advance solutions that more effectively confront challenges together. Thank you.
The city was in court today on right to shelter, kind of playing on the question. Both sides, or the state and the city, seem to be indicating that they're near a deal here to, I guess, give them some sort of leniency with housing migrants. Do you fear that the lifting of right to shelter for the migrant population, again, what is your reaction to that? That does look like it's a city.
You know, as far as right to shelter, again, we're going to wait to see how that unfurls in the system. We are still, depending on the law, everyone still has a right to shelter in New York City. This is still a sanctuary city, and we're going to keep on taking a look at how that unfurls. But as far as the right to shelter, how the law is interpreted, we'll follow whatever the court says. But as it stands right now, people still need a place to stay. People still need a place to live. People are still coming in as we speak right now. So we continue to lean on the fact that New York is still a sanctuary city. Thank you. Thank you all very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, colleagues. We'll see you in a little bit. Thank you.